Suburban neighborhoods often thrive on sameness. Identical lawns, freshly painted fences, and carefully maintained driveways line the cul-de-sacs like a perfect row of teeth. At first glance, it all seems harmless enough, just a community of families trying to keep things tidy. But underneath that veneer of order often lurks something far less pleasant: the watchful eyes of those who patrol the rules. In this neighborhood, that role was played by Karen. Karen had lived on the street for nearly 2 decades. In that time, she had become the unofficial enforcer of the HOA's guidelines, carrying clipboards and printed rule sheets as if they were sacred scripture. She took personal pride in making sure every trash can was hidden by sundown, every mailbox was polished, and every blade of grass cut to regulation height, and she expected everyone else to do the same. So when she noticed colorful chalk doodles spreading across the driveway of one family's home, she was horrified. The drawings had started innocently enough. A child with a box of sidewalk chalk scribbling crooked suns, wobbly flowers, and stick figure families. To most neighbors, it was charming, a little reminder of childhood in a world that often felt too polished, too stiff. Cars driving by slowed for a moment, not to frown, but to smile. The sketches were messy, sure, but they were joyful. Karen didn't see joy. She saw violation. She muttered to herself about defacement and lowering property values as she snapped photos from the curb. She typed up emails to the HOA board, demanding immediate fines. And of course, she confronted the family directly, scolding them about rules against defacing neighborhood property. Even though the driveway wasn't neighborhood property at all, it was private. The family brushed it off at first, thinking it would blow over. Kids draw, chalk washes away, life goes on. But Karen didn't stop. She filed reports. She showed up at board meetings with blown-up photos of the chalk doodles, presenting them as evidence of moral decline. She told anyone who would listen that if they allowed graffiti on one driveway, soon the whole block would be ruined. Her outrage began to poison the air. What had once been light-hearted and fun now carried the weight of conflict. The child, once eager to draw in the sunshine, hesitated with chalk in hand, unsure if joy was worth the scowls from across the street. Parents whispered about fines. Neighbors grumbled about Karen's relentless crusade. But here's the thing about trying to stamp out joy. Sometimes it doesn't disappear. Sometimes it grows. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. The driveway, freshly washed clean after rain, sat blank and grey. But by evening, colour bloomed again. Not from a child's hand this time, but from something more deliberate. An older sibling, or perhaps a visiting relative, had joined in, sketching larger, more intricate designs. A rainbow arched across the concrete with swirls of clouds and stars. A detailed dragon coiled in one corner, fire bursting from its mouth. The difference was clear. This wasn't a child's doodle. This was art. Word spread quickly. Neighbors came to look. Phones came out. Photos snapped, and whispers grew. Some were impressed, others cautious. But all agreed on one thing: this was no ordinary chalk drawing. And when Karen saw it, she nearly exploded. She stomped across the street, her phone held high, snapping photos furiously. She sent messages to the HOA before the dust had even settled, demanding immediate escalation. She called it graffiti vandalism, insisting it would bring crime to the neighborhood. She muttered about gangs, about outsiders, about the sanctity of suburban order, and as she did, the rest of the block watched her unravel. But the family didn't back down. Instead of scrubbing the driveway clean, they let the artwork stay. When rain threatened, they sheltered it with tarps. When Karen fumed, they smiled politely and carried on. And soon, something unexpected began to happen. Local artists took notice. A teenager with a knack for anime characters added her touch one afternoon, sketching vibrant faces along the edges. A retired art teacher stopped by, chalk in hand, eager to join the fun. Within weeks, the driveway had transformed from a simple slab of concrete into a living canvas, changing and evolving with every new contribution. What began as one child's pastime was now a community project. Cars slowed down not just to smile, but to stop. Strangers came by, curious about the murals they'd seen online. Social media posts spread, tagged with the neighborhood's name. The once blank driveway was becoming famous, And Karen couldn't stand it. Her complaints grew louder, more desperate. She shouted about bylaws, citing passages that didn't quite apply. She accused the family of deliberately mocking her authority. She even claimed the artwork was damaging her property's value, though most neighbors privately suspected the opposite. Far from lowering the street's worth, the driveway had become a draw, a selling point, proof that this wasn't just another cookie-cutter block of beige houses. It was a place alive with creativity. But in Karen's mind, none of that mattered. To her, the chalk wasn't art. It was defiance, and defiance couldn't be tolerated. The HOA board, weary of her constant demands, reluctantly agreed to send warning letters. They cited unauthorized exterior alterations, even though chalk was temporary, washable, and posed no structural change whatsoever. The family received fines. Threats of legal action followed. Karen celebrated each letter as though it were a personal victory. But the family had reached a breaking point. They were tired of being bullied, tired of seeing joy trampled under rules that seemed more about control than community. And so, they made a decision. If Karen wanted to treat their driveway chalk as a threat, then they would show her just how powerful it could be. They began reaching out to local art groups, community centers, even professional muralists. Invitations spread. Come draw with us. Bring your chalk. Make our driveway your canvas. The response was overwhelming. Artists of every kind, students, hobbyists, professionals showed up, boxes of chalk in hand, ready to contribute. What had begun as a child's pastime had now grown into a movement. The next weekend, the driveway was unrecognizable. Layer upon layer of artwork covered every inch. Detailed portraits, sprawling landscapes, abstract swirls of color. The grey concrete had vanished beneath a flood of creativity, and the neighborhood gathered, not just to watch but to celebrate. It felt like a festival alive with laughter, music, and art. Karen, of course, was livid. She stormed about the cul-de-sac, shouting threats of fines, snapping pictures of every chalk-covered hand. But the more she raged, the less anyone listened. Her voice, once commanding, had become background noise against the buzz of joy. The driveway had become something bigger than anyone expected. It was no longer just a slab of pavement. It was a gallery, a statement, a rebellion against control. And the more Karen tried to fight it, the more power it seemed to gain. By the end of the weekend, photos of the murals had gone viral online. Local newspapers picked up the story. "Suburban driveway transformed into art gallery," one headline read. Artists begged for invitations to the next session. What Karen had tried to stamp out had instead flourished, growing larger than she could have imagined. And as the sun set that Sunday, the family stood at the edge of their driveway, watching neighbors and strangers alike admire the colors, the lines, the sheer creativity sprawled across the concrete. They knew this was only the beginning. Because if Karen thought chalk was a problem before, she hadn't seen anything yet. Winter settled in slowly, blanketing the neighborhood in a pale stillness. Frost clung to rooftops, the streets sparkled under thin layers of ice, and holiday decorations began to appear along the cul-de-sacs. In most places, the season would bring peace, a kind of quiet joy where neighbors exchanged cookies, bundled in scarves, and admired the glow of lights strung across porches. But in this neighborhood, peace was the last thing anyone felt. Across the block, the Doghouse stood like a monument. It had weathered the first season of defiance, grown stronger with each week, and now carried a presence impossible to deny. Children pointed at it as their parents drove past. Strangers parked at the end of the street just to catch a glimpse. What had once been a humble shelter for a golden retriever had transformed into the most talked-about structure in town. The HOA board, led by its most zealous member, Karen, was furious. They had issued notices, demanded compliance, and escalated fines that now ran into the thousands. None of it mattered. The Doghouse remained. The fines went unpaid, and the family behind it showed no sign of backing down. Karen, in particular, had turned the fight into something personal. She saw the Doghouse not just as a violation of rules, but as a direct attack on her authority, her influence, and her vision of what the neighborhood should be. Every morning, she stood at her window, glaring across the street, watching for any new addition. Every evening she typed emails filled with outrage, her words sharp as blades, addressed to the board, the city, even legal firms willing to take the case. The neighborhood was split. Some rallied quietly behind Karen, fearful that if one family could defy the rules so boldly, the whole community would unravel. Others whispered their admiration for the project, seeing it as a stand against the suffocating control of the HOA. But most of all, people were fascinated. The Doghouse had become theater, and everyone had a front row seat. Then came the turning point. It happened after a particularly heated board meeting, one that dragged late into the night. The HOA had finally resolved to take the matter to court. They would demand a judge enforce the bylaws, force removal of the Doghouse, and levy damages. Karen emerged from the meeting with her chin lifted high, convinced that victory was within reach. But when she returned home, she saw something that made her heart stop. The Doghouse had grown again. Now it wasn't just bigger, it was taller. A second level had been added, complete with a balcony that overlooked the street. Solar panels gleamed on the roof. A tiny weather vane spun in the winter wind. And along the balcony railings, festive lights twinkled in patterns more elaborate than anything Karen had dared place on her own house. The golden retriever, perched like a king on the balcony, looked down over the block as though surveying his kingdom. Karen's outrage exploded. Her anger spilled into the neighborhood. She stormed from door to door demanding signatures for petitions, calling for emergency fines, threatening anyone who dared defend the growing structure. But something unexpected began to happen. People were no longer nodding along with her fury. Some closed their doors quickly, others muttered about overreach and let them have their fun, and a few openly smiled when they looked past Karen at the glowing masterpiece across the street. For the first time, Karen realized she might be losing control. The HOA pressed forward with its legal threats. Letters arrived from attorneys, stamped with intimidating seals. The family received warnings that the matter would go before a judge. The stakes had risen beyond neighborhood gossip and petty fines. This was now a battle of principles, control versus freedom, compliance versus creativity. And through it all, the Doghouse grew. Spring brought new energy. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and construction began again. What had started as a doghouse was now something closer to a guest house. It had multiple rooms, decorated interiors, and even a staircase. Landscaping appeared around it. Flower beds, a stone path, and small lanterns that lit up at night. The neighborhood couldn't stay away. Families strolled past with strollers. Teenagers posed for pictures in front of it. Local bloggers started posting photos online, dubbing it the mansion for man's best friend. Traffic increased on the street. Cars slowed down, drivers craning their necks to see the spectacle. The Doghouse wasn't just a neighborhood story anymore. It was a city-wide attraction. The more attention it drew, the more Karen burned. Her anger drove her to new extremes. She began reporting every minor infraction she could find. A trash can left out too long. A lawn not mowed short enough. A seasonal decoration put up too early. Her clipboard filled with names and addresses. Her reports growing by the day. But the more she tightened her grip, the more the neighborhood slipped away from her, because everyone was looking at the Doghouse. By summer, it had become a landmark. Journalists came to cover it. Drone footage appeared online showing the scale of the miniature mansion. People began comparing it not just to houses in the neighborhood, but specifically to Karen's house. And the comparison was brutal. By the time autumn rolled around again, the street had changed forever. What had once been a quiet row of matching homes was now famous, even notorious. The Doghouse that started as a simple shelter had grown into a structure impossible to ignore. 3 stories tall, with a wraparound porch, a pitched roof that gleamed with solar panels, and landscaping so immaculate it looked like a park. At night, strings of lights twinkled across the balconies. By day, the golden retriever padded proudly through his domain, wagging his tail as visitors stopped to marvel. The Doghouse was no longer just part of the neighborhood. It was the neighborhood. News stations had filmed segments. Online videos showed tours of its rooms. Social media accounts posted updates on every new addition, every upgrade, every playful moment the golden retriever enjoyed inside his sprawling palace. Cars lined the street as curious strangers came to see it for themselves. What had once been a rule violation had become a tourist attraction. And through it all, Karen seethed. She watched her neighborhood slip further from her grasp. Once she had been its queen, the self-proclaimed guardian of order. Every hedge, every shutter, every garden statue had bowed to her will. But now, no one listened. No one cared about her petitions, her angry letters, or her endless demands. All eyes were fixed on the doghouse, and she was nothing more than a bitter shadow in its glow. Her house, once admired for its pristine perfection, now looked ordinary, even dull, compared to the creativity of the structure across the street. The whispers had turned into laughter, the admiration into mockery. "The dog's palace is bigger than Karen's house," neighbors joked. Children sang it like a rhyme. Even visitors who didn't know her name referred to her as the lady who lost to a doghouse. It was a humiliation she couldn't escape. The HOA tried one last desperate push. They filed formal lawsuits, citing safety hazards, zoning violations, and property value damage. But the courts moved slowly, and public opinion moved quickly. Every article, every broadcast, every viral post framed the battle the same way. A power-hungry HOA against a family just trying to give their dog a home. The story was too appealing, too lopsided, too irresistible. The doghouse became a symbol of freedom against petty control, and the HOA became the villain. The board fractured. Members resigned, unwilling to attach their names to the increasingly unpopular fight. The treasurer quit after angry residents demanded explanations for rising legal fees. Others simply stopped attending meetings, ashamed of the attention. Soon only Karen remained fully committed, clinging desperately to the rules, to her vision of order, to the crumbling authority she once wielded like a weapon. But even Karen's power had limits. Neighbors stopped answering her knocks. They rolled their eyes at her clipboards. Some even openly mocked her in the street, pointing toward the glowing doghouse and asking why she didn't build something of her own instead of tearing others down. The balance of power had shifted, and Karen found herself isolated. Still, she refused to surrender. One crisp October morning, she marched across the street determined to confront the family directly. She rehearsed the words in her head, sharpening them like knives, certain that if she could just deliver them with enough force, she could still win. But when she arrived, she didn't find a family cowering before her. She found an audience. Dozens of neighbors had gathered to watch, as landscapers installed a new fountain in front of the doghouse. Children laughed as water bubbled over smooth stones. Parents chatted and sipped coffee, treating it like a community event. And at the center of it all was the golden retriever, his tail wagging as if he knew he was the star of the show. When Karen appeared, the crowd fell silent. For a moment, she thought she had regained control. All eyes were on her again, waiting. But then someone chuckled. Another whispered the phrase she hated most. "It's bigger than Karen's house." The laughter spread, not cruel, not loud, but undeniable. And in that moment, Karen realized the truth. She had lost. Her face flushed red, her fists clenched, but she could do nothing. No rule, no fine, no threat could undo what had happened. The doghouse was no longer just wood and nails. It was an idea, and ideas couldn't be torn down by bylaws. That night, Karen sat in her perfect silent house, staring across the street at the glowing palace. The lights shimmered in the darkness, reflecting off the windows of her own home. For the first time, she saw her house for what it was, rigid, sterile, lifeless. Across the street there was joy, there was laughter, there was freedom, and she had none of it. The weeks that followed sealed the fate of the HOA. Attendance at meetings dwindled to nothing. Fines went unpaid, rules went unenforced. The board dissolved quietly, stripped of its power, abandoned by the very people it claimed to represent. Without its teeth, the HOA was nothing more than a stack of old papers in a dusty office. The doghouse stood tall, a symbol of the neighborhood's new era. Families added their own touches to their homes, colorful shutters, whimsical garden decorations, creative landscaping. Freed from the chokehold of Karen's rules, the neighborhood began to breathe again. Each house reflected the personality of the family inside, and the street came alive with color and character. As for Karen, she retreated. She kept her lawn trimmed, her shutters painted, her porch spotless, but no one noticed anymore. Her reign was over. The neighborhood had moved on without her, And every time she looked out her window, she was reminded of the day she lost. Not to another homeowner, not to a board vote, but to a doghouse. The golden retriever still lounged proudly on his balcony, watching over his kingdom. Visitors still came, children still laughed, and neighbors still smiled as they passed. The dog's palace was no longer a rebellion. It was a tradition, a landmark, a piece of the neighborhood's identity. The battle was over. The doghouse had won. And in the end, it was bigger than Karen's house in every way that mattered.